Today, I have a very special artist. As a Latinx artist who was born in Europe and grew up in Puerto Rico, he has lived in North Carolina for many years. My guest certainly has an interesting story to tell. He is an abstract painter fascinated with food, its preparation, and its intricacies in our society. And food is his current inspiration while creating art. I'm Lizette Cruz Watko, and my guest today on compARTE is Georges LeChevallier. Georges, welcome to compARTE.
Gracias, Lizette. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Gracias por invitarme al show.
You want to do this in English or in Spanish? ¿Cómo quieres?
Spanglish. Lo hacemos aquí mitad, mitad y half y mitad.
Así lo haremos.
Lo vamos cambiando.
Claro. Bueno, Georges, dime un poquito sobre ti. Tell me about your life. How is this born in Europe and Puerto Rico and North Carolina? How does that all come about?
Well, my dad, he was French, and my
Mm.
mom was from Puerto Rico, and they met in Venezuela, out of all places. My mom moved when she was young to Venezuela, and obviously my dad did too. They met there. They got married in Venezuela, in Caracas. My older brother and sister were born in Caracas, and then they moved to Paris. They moved to France, where I was born. I didn't live long. I didn't live much in Paris. We moved to Puerto Rico when I was about a year old. So literally, I grew up in Puerto Rico, in San Juan and Santurce, um, and I lived there till I was about 14 years old. When we moved to Los Angeles, we moved to El Segundo. I went to high school there. Then I went to Spain, to La Academia de Bellas Artes, to study painting. I
Oh,
was pretty rebellious when I was young, and I loved to travel. So when I was about 18, I picked up my backpack and I left, and I went to Spain to live for a few years and went to the art school there. I came back. I got my master's in New York City, and I lived there with my fiance, now my wife, which she's originally from California. And from New York, we moved to North Carolina. We wanted to regroup a little bit, save money, and we moved to North Carolina about 20 years ago. And now we have a house, we have kids, I have an art studio. So so it's a pretty full life right now.
yeah. Well, we have something in common. We
Yes.
both we both moved here from California, and we
Okay.
both lived in El Segundo.
Oh, you did? Oh,
Yes.
that's really cool. Went to El Segundo. I mean, yeah, I went to El Segundo High School. I went to El Camino College in Torrance.
So did
And then,
I.
oh, did you? There you go.
That's
And
crazy.
then, yeah, and then I went to Cal State Long Beach for my BFA. But that's really good. You know Torrance and El Camino
Yeah, of
College.
course. I went to Hawthorne High because
Oh, Torrance,
I
yeah,
lived in El Segundo, but I lived
yeah,
closer to Hawthorne than El
yeah.
Segundo High. Did this whole citizen of the world thing kind of inspire your life?
Well, I grew up traveling. Obviously, the fact that we lived in we lived in France, we lived in California, Puerto Rico. I lived in Spain and New York. My dad always worked in jobs that had to do with traveling. When he was young, he worked with the French, and he worked in ships like in the Normandy and the France. There were big transatlantic cruise ships. When I was little, he started working with Air France. So that means that we could travel for almost free.
Mm.
So since I was a little kid, even growing up in Puerto Rico, we would spend summers in France, and we would travel to places like Martinique and Guadeloupe, which were small islands, and then we would travel to Venezuela. So I grew up traveling since I was a little kid. And now, travel is really easy for me. And I think one of the things that me and my wife, we talk about, we don't want to give our kids money, mainly because we don't have much, but we want to give them experiences. That's what's going to last. And part of part of the experiences is travel. When you travel, you become more connected, and it creates experiences that money literally cannot buy.
I so connect with you,
Yeah,
George. We have that same mentality.
yeah,
We figured that the kids will learn more, they'll absorb things, their environment, instead of just, giving them money.
yeah,
You get paid for a job, uh,
yeah,
and hopefully one that you love,
yeah.
like you do. Is it hard to live as an artist in society nowadays?
Economically, I would say yes, because again, when you create art, when you're creative, that's a hard sell because I think people, at least here in the U.S., they don't respect it. When I was when I was in high school, I wanted to become an artist since I was like 16, 15. When I was in high school, pretty much a lot of people told me not to do it just because I'm not gonna be able to pay my bills. Like that's a hobby, you should not do it, yada yada yada. When I travel other places, Puerto Rico included, there's a different attitude about the arts. There's a attitude of respect. And obviously in France, as a matter of fact, when me and my wife we got married in Paris,
Hmm.
in the wedding certificate, it said that my profession was an artist.
Hmm.
And I was just so excited because down here they would not necessarily put profession artist. Over there, not only they put it in the wedding, but everybody was, oh wow, you're an artist. That's cool, like
Huh.
um, so economically it's hard because you do a product and the product is not a necessity in life. Nobody's gonna eat a painting, even though I put food. No, hopefully nobody eats it. So it's always a struggle, but I'm lucky enough that I'm an art professor. So I teach art at Nash Community College. And again, I think more than creating, because I create anyways, more than creating, I think I'm really lucky that I work in a job that has to do with the arts. So my income comes from teaching art, talking about art. And I think that's where I'm lucky at because I've had many other jobs that I really didn't like just to pay the bills. And that's not good.
Mhm.
Psychologically, uh, I think it's hard again because most people don't get it. They think if you're an artist, that comes easy for you, and therefore they should not be spending money on the arts. It's like, hey, can I have this for free or can I have this for half price? It's only drawing and it comes easy for you. What people don't realize that when they buy a painting, let's say it took me half an hour to do the painting,
Mhm.
it didn't take me half an hour. It took me 20 years because all the stuff that I do in that half an hour, it's condensed from 20 years that I have done stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's
So,
a challenge, but I would not have it any other way.
right. How can we educate the viewers on how do we, what is it that makes art appreciation? How do we value it? I mean,
Yeah,
so
I think.
that folks can be a little bit, more conscious when they see a piece of art.
Yeah, I think, and we'll go back really quickly about the money thing. When people ask, I have so many times people come up to me and say, "Hey, if you do a painting for me, or if you do something, it's going to be great publicity. I'll show it in Instagram or whatever, and it's going to be great publicity for you." Which is interesting because you don't do that when you go to the supermarket. You don't tell the cashier, "Hey, if you give me the groceries half off, I'm gonna walk a few extra miles with the bag so people can see that I went shopping there. They wouldn't do it. So,
Right.
um, so um, I think the main part for people to realize, and this is a common mistake, we're very educated with music. When we listen to, let's say, hip hop, we know that it's different, or we're gonna get different things than if we listen to country. And if we listen into country, we know we're gonna get different expectations than if we listen to classical music. In music, we know how to change gears. We don't do that in painting. There's different styles, there's different languages, but somehow we we think that it's all the same. If you like little landscapes with boats, that's that's great, but that's not the same language that somebody painting abstract. That's not the same language than somebody doing digital art. That's not the same language that Michelangelo did. That's not the same language that Picasso did.
Mhm.
People like Michelangelo, which is great, but Michelangelo, he created in the 1500s. We don't listen to music from the 1500s, or usually the average person doesn't do it.
Mhm.
So it would be like me coming up to a musician and saying, "Hey, it's great you play jazz, but you know what? I really like this music from the 1500s." That's not the same because the
Right.
technology is not the same. The expectations are not the same. The viewers are not the same. Michelangelo didn't paint the Sistine Chapel for people that talk through computers, that have phones, that, Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel for people that didn't know how to read. People thought the earth was flat. People thought if you got sick, it's because of God, not because of science. I think the biggest thing that people need to understand is that there's different languages.
Mhm.
You can paint a beautiful portrait, or you can paint a landscape, or you can paint with food.
Mhm. Yes.
And they're just different highways. But most people think of it as just one, and that's a big mistake.
Right. So painting with food,
Yeah,
I'm assuming, and just an assumption that
yeah.
it would be well, I guess a little bit more retro, meaning I'm sure that paints were originally created with foods,
Hmm.
um, or I'm assuming again, but that it's a more natural process, is it?
Hmm. When I was 15, my two choices that I wanted to follow was either go to the into the food industry or go into art. And I took art, but I always been very close to the food industry. Growing up in France, growing up in Puerto Rico, living in the South now, food is extremely important. I think food, again, most people don't realize how much food defines the region. And for me, with the travel, it's food is really important. When it comes down to painting, I always thought of myself almost like a chef. Like, I have been involved so much in painting, and I have studied so much about art and artists and all of this. I'm a little psychotic, so I have read so many art books. I have read so many. I mean, I teach art history, and at one point, I realized that I'm just repeating a lot of things.
Mm.
Uh,
Mhm.
so that's when I really started studying chefs and food preparation, because I see a lot of the commitment that a chef or a cook has is the same commitment that a painter has. You
In
know,
creating a piece of art.
yeah, and it's interesting because when you cook, you can spend days cooking one dish, you know, and it's that whole process. And painting is about the same way. And so a lot of times I realize when I'm painting that is the process. It's a process of me stretching the canvas. It's the process of me getting the wood and cutting the wood. It's the process of me putting the gesso. Before I even paint, I have spent a few hours just in the process of getting the canvas ready. And that's the same
Mhm.
way a chef would do. I mean, it's a slow process. I started mixing sand. I've always been very interested in textures in the paint. So I started mixing sand, which led to coffee beans, just because I used to work in a coffee house, and it worked. And now I'm mixing things like turmeric and curry, and I'm starting to make my own inks with blueberries, things like that. So, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it gets rotted. um, I did a I did I did a painting with tamarindo,
Uh-huh, tamarindo.
and and that was a disaster. Like it got mold. It's
Oh,
been a long it's been a long process.
so is sugar not a good combination when it
Not
comes
at
to
all.
art?
Uh, ne- I anything that's oily, it's not a good. Like I put olive oil in one painting, and
Mm.
it got mold.
Oh,
Coffee, coffee is really good, and pretty much a lot of things. If you can mix it with, let's say, vinegar or even um, high content alcohol, then that works. Beer doesn't give me a good color, but I should experiment more with maybe ales. You know,
mm.
I
Yeah.
know definitely I have used wine. Wine, it's pretty much a given because it creates this red color. The thing about all these paints that are made from natural materials, the color changes a lot. And but I would not be surprised if after 10, 15 years, a lot of the colors from at least my paintings will start to disappear, which I think is great because it shows that the painting is alive.
Mhm,
There's
mhm.
changes going on.
So do you use, other than like vegetables and herbs, do you use any actual like grains other than coffee or anything else?
Yeah,
Ink?
I also use regular acrylic paints
Mm,
and spray
okay.
paints, spray paints if I have to, acrylic paints, um, pencil. But right now I'm starting a new series of work, and I'm gonna try to use the least possible paint, if any.
Mm,
I know that for the black, and I'm really interested in the black that I'm gonna be using in these paintings. I know I made my own charcoal. I went through my backyard, and I found all these little pieces of twigs, wood, and I made homemade charcoal from it to draw. But I'm not gonna draw. I'm gonna blend it, and then I did. I baked some bones.
mm.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh, it smelled it. I did it at home. A lot of my experiments really kind of backfire. Um, I took chicken bones and rib bones. You put it in the oven, and you bake the hell out of it until it literally crumbles. It becomes burnt and just crumbles, and then you blend it, and you keep blending it until it becomes like this powder. I believe you bake it for like an hour too, the bones. But literally, our house smelled like that. It
Oh,
it smelled like somebody died and was buried inside the house. It really smelled bad for a few days. Uh, but yeah, I'm gonna be making paints from this mix of charcoal and bones, and hopefully
so,
gives me a nice black.
oh, so you're thinking both mixed together will make you some black. Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, because
So,
the bones are kind of dark brown, so I want to mix it with the charcoal.
gotcha. Now, now that you are talking about the process of you creating the paints and testing things and not coming out and finally finding something that works, it really makes you appreciate what an artist goes to. And to your point about you're paying for the experience,
Hmm.
the 20 years, 30 years that that person's been working to create this art. um, it makes sense why some people's work is more expensive than others.
Yeah, and yeah, again, like a lot, like where I get my most, I get my my most inspiration It's from food plating, like when you go to a restaurant and the chef puts the food and they put like the little decorations and all that.
Right.
That for me, it's painting. And for me, that's one of the most important things about food is the presentation. And I have always been infatuated with that. And that's why my painting is inspired by food, is by presentation. For food, most people, well, not most people, the great chefs, the really good chefs understand two things. One, that food is about the presentation. Okay, you can have the most tasty food, but if it's just put in the plate, you probably won't be attracted to it.
Mhm.
It's all about presentation, but it's also about textures. Great chefs understand textures. And when we think about it, a lot of the food that we don't like has nothing to do with taste, has everything to do with how it feels in your mouth, the texture of the mouth. People don't like mayonnaise, not or tomatoes. My one of my kids really hates tomato, but it's not the flavor per se because he eats tomato sauce and he eats products made with tomatoes. It's just the gelatin taste of the tomato. So the great chefs understand how to play with textures. You put croutons on salad, not for the taste, but for the crunchiness that goes with the salad. So great chefs understand visuals and textures, which is something that is not flavor per se.
Since you're speaking of chefs, is there a particular chef that you have not worked with that you really would like to use as inspiration for a couple of pieces of art?
There's two chefs, Massimo Bottura, he's in Italy, and Grant Aschatz. Massimo Bottura, which he's an Italian chef. That would be the chef I would love to work with. And hopefully, in my little dream world, he would invite me to his restaurant and sit down with me, and we can have a meal. Um, so I
Call
would
it out
say,
to the universe, honey. Call it.
yeah, exactly. So I would say Massimo Bottura, and hopefully in a year or two, we're gonna be looking at this video when I'm with him and say, look, you know what, it was meant to be. And Grant Aschatz, he is in Chicago. Both of these chefs, they really study contemporary art, and they kind of do the opposite that I'm doing.
Mm.
They take art and paintings and then they bring it to their food. And I'm taking their food and bringing it to my art. So I think both of those chefs would be something really cool to work with.
So, what is it like? What is the process like working with a chef in order to create one of their dishes?
I asked them what dish changed their life. Like everybody has one dish that made you. If if you're a chef, there's always that one chef, one dish that you realize that you wanted to become a chef. Might be your grandmother's food, or it might be the first time you create a dish that made you big. There's always something. Some chefs come up immediately. Oh, you know what? My favorite dish is, this from my grandmother. Um, and other chefs are like, let me think about it because there's been like three or four dishes. And I understand it's probably hard because if somebody asked me, what's your favorite painting? I wouldn't be able to answer. Well, I would, but again, it's hard. And I think food is really personal, but at the same time, food is something that makes you, you know, um, when you're homesick, this is really important. When you're homesick, you're not really that homesick. You're homesick for food. Because I know when I go to the West Coast, you know, I went to California a few years ago to Segundo, and there were specific restaurants. I wanted to go to El Tarrasco, which is a Mexican restaurant. I wanted to go to In-N-Out Burger, um, and places like that. When I go to Puerto Rico, it's all about food. Or when I go to places that I have lived in my life. So when you're homesick, you're homesick for maybe your grandma's or your mother's food or the local little bodega food. So food is really important for all of us, and I think all of us has that one dish. Can be In and Out, can be White Castle, can be your mom's food. That when you eat it, it brings you to a safe, happy place. And I think so that's pretty much what I want to get from the chef. I want to know what dish or what food takes you back to that happy place.
That's pretty deep. Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to touch upon two things. Well, one thing that I know you have, well, a couple of things you have coming up.
Mhm.
You have coming up are the closing of Dali, the Diamante Arts Leadership Institute, but you also have a interesting exhibit that you're curating. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. I'm kind of, because of COVID, everything shut down for me. And now we're all, for the next few months, I'm trying to pick up everything that's been shut down. First, I'm really excited to have the closing of the Dali fellowship. So that's, I think, really good. And I think Diamante is doing something amazing, supporting the local arts. I think it's really, really important. And I'm really excited to be part of this big project. I'm curating an exhibit for the Block Gallery. And it's in downtown Raleigh. It's part of the city. And this exhibit is about Latinx art. And what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to exhibit artists that paint abstract, non-objective work. Because when we think of um, Latinx art here in the U.S., we have a stereotype that is based on magical realism. When we think of Latin American art, we think of images of Frida. We think of images of flowers, of skulls, very colorful, traditional art, which is great. I really respect this artist. But Latin America is more complicated than this. Um, I'm the perfect example. Yeah, we have people that, well, Latin Americans, we're mutts. I'm a good example because I was born in France. I'm as white as it can be, but I consider myself from Puerto Rico first. I consider myself Latinx. So I want to show artists that paint abstract, something that people don't expect when you go to a Latin American exhibit. And the name of the exhibit is Abstracto Abstracto Latino, and it's based on food again,
Mm.
because in New York and in many big cities, they have restaurants that are called Chino Latino, and they're
Uh-huh.
the craziest combination, and they're really good because it's a Chinese restaurant and a Latinx restaurant. They're called Chino Latinos, and they're really popular.
Yeah.
And the first time I saw one, it's like, wait, how can you combine Chinese food and Latino food in the same place? So I took the name from that. That we don't expect Chinese food and Latin food to be in the same place, and a lot of times our expectations are not that great abstract work and Latinx art are combined, and that's why Chino Latino, Abstracto Latino. So that's the name of the, you know,
I like the play on words there.
yeah. And I'm also having two exhibits at the end of the year. One at the new Pollen Art Center, and another one at the Cary Art Center. And at the Cary Art Center is a special exhibit for me, and this is what I'm painting using the bones and the charcoal. It's I call it Requiem paintings, and that's the title of the exhibit because it's a tribute to all the people that have passed in the last year. Um, each painting, it's based on a dish that is served in a funeral service in different parts of the world.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
yeah. Um, every country, every culture, uh, food is really important in any funeral service. This is eating. It's the eating is the greatest expression of being alive. Um, so it's interesting because in funeral services, which every time I go to a funeral, I can never eat, but there's always food. I probably drink more than I eat. There's always food, and people get together and we talk and we eat and all of this, and this is something that's worldwide. So for this exhibit, I have been studying different um, funeral services throughout the world and what food they serve. Like Ireland, much different than what they do in England. What we do here, what they would do in Latin countries, what they would do in Asian countries, African countries. Every country has kind of like a specific uh, food dish that they serve, and instead of asking chefs, I've been studying these dishes. Again, I think um, I've had some special people pass away in my life the last year, but not only this, overall, it's been a year with COVID and so many people dying that somehow I have to put it into painting.
Yeah,
So that's what's coming up at the end of the year in November.
I totally understand, and I can't wait to see it because it sounds so interesting and so complex at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to paint. I just want to do the act of painting. Okay. You'll see them.
Well,
So,
looking forward to that.
yeah, thanks.
Any words you'd like to share with our viewers, especially young artists that may be watching before we close?
Um, be kind. Just for everybody, be kind. Just, I think there's been a lot of nastiness. There's been a lot of fighting. Um, so I would say just be kind. For young artists, just follow your heart. Okay. Don't worry too much about followers in Instagram. Don't worry too much about selling. Don't worry too much about things. Just do your painting. As a matter of fact, all my life I've had to had side hustles and jobs just so I can create. I have never expect to make a living from my art. The writer Albert Camus, he wrote The Stranger. He always had a side job to make money because he never wanted his writing to change because he needed money. And I think that's a good way of seeing it. If you like to paint, paint. Hopefully, you can sell, which is nothing wrong with that, and make money, and that's great. But if you're young, just develop your craft. Don't worry too much about selling. If you're good at it, things will happen. And if they don't, then you're doing what your heart follows, and things will work out ultimately. But you'll be a happier person, I guess.
You're
So
right.
that's
Well, when you're expressing yourself, you always feel happier because you feel like
yeah,
somebody out there is listening, right?
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Georges, I so appreciate talking to you today. Keep us posted
I
on
will.
all your endeavors. And we would love to share them on the Amantes pages. Um, have a great evening and keep on trekking. I love you.
Thanks. Thank you, and thank you, Lisette, for what you do. I mean, you're a superstar in helping the Latinx community, and also what Diamante does. Again, you guys being extremely helpful for me and a lot of the Latino artists. And again, you guys are making um, everything better for the Latino community here in the U.S. So thank you. Yeah. So
Thanks. Have a great day.
thank you.
Well, that was a great interview with Georges LeChevallier. What an interesting and inspiring life he's lived, right? Well, now I want to invite you for the presentation, the 16th presentation of Ritmo Latino Festival, as Diamante celebrates the Latino art, music, and culture of all our Latino communities in North Carolina. I'm Lizette Cruz Watko. Join me again next month for another episode of compARTE, where we interview another interesting North Carolina Latino artist. See you next time. compARTE is a production of Diamante Arts and Cultural Center.